And I just turned around and I hauled ass out of there. I was done. I wasn't dealing with that.
The hypocrisy of the cult is one of the things that turned me away the quickest.
When I turned my headlights on, it turned and looked at us, and one of the things I remember the most were the eyes were glowing red.
I see an orb of light. It is just circling these steps like it is waiting for me.
And he begins to tell them that he saw a UFO. They're basically like, what are you talking about? That's 7 foot up on a tree, peeking around it. And that's where I saw the top of the muzzle, nose, and the eyes. As soon as I made eye contact with this thing, it felt like death.
Welcome back to Tinfoil Tales. I'm your host, Brandon Wright. Tonight's episode, we're going to be joined by author W.T. Watson, but I refer to him as Travis. He is a author of several different paranormal books, looking to dive into a lot of the stuff that he's been researching. But before we bring him on, if you've ever had an experience or a story you'd like to share and you'd like to be on an episode of Tinfoil Tales, there's 2 things you can do. You can either send me an email at tinfoiltalespodcast@gmail.com, or you can go to tinfoiltales.com and go to the contact section. Either way, get your message to me. So make sure to reach out and we'll get something scheduled for a future episode. If you'd like to help the podcast out, please continue to share it around. Word of mouth is what helps the podcast continue to grow. So every time you share it, it's potential new guests listening that may reach out and have more episodes coming your way. You can also help out by leaving a 5-star rating and review wherever you listen to Tinfoil Tales at. That helps with the algorithms. It helps with making the podcast more discoverable. It's not just me saying that to try and get better ratings. It literally does help out. So if you could do that, it's definitely appreciated. Remember that every last Thursday of the month, I do a special live stream on YouTube called Tinfoil Tales After Dark at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So if you're not subscribing on the YouTube channel, I recommend going over there and doing that so you don't miss out. If you'd like to help the podcast financially, you can go to the Patreon and become a member. There are 2 different tiers. There's the free membership and then the paid membership. With the paid membership, you get early access to all the episodes ad-free, up to 2 months earlier than what is usually released. You get access to all the live videos and some discounts to some goodies. But with either membership, you get access to listen to Crinkled Conspiracies, the show that I do with my friend Ed Corella that kind of dives into topics of conspiracies and other current events. That's only $1.99 a month, so less than $2. It's worth checking out if you're interested in helping Tinfoil Tales out. There is a merch store available too. So if you'd like to show your love for Tinfoil Tales, you can go to the merch store. Pick out a shirt, a hat, some stickers, whatever it is that you're interested in. I'm sure you'd find it on the merch store. Links for all of that information is included in the show notes. So the Patreon, merch store, all that is in the show notes. This fall, I will be appearing at 4 different events, starting with Bigfoots and Brews and Spirits 2 on September 14th. That is in Dowagiac, Michigan at the Sister Lakes Brewing Company. It's being put on by my friend Eric Szilagyi from Uncomfortable Podcast. Make sure to check that out. On September 27th and 28th, I'll be at the first annual Indiana Bigfoot Conference down in Nashville, Indiana. Tickets for both of the Bigfoot events are available in the show notes. And in October, there'll be 2 free events that are open to everyone. The first is ParaUnity 6 here in Miami County, Indiana at the 4-H Fairgrounds. That is on October 19th. And on October 26th, I'll be in Crawfordsville, Indiana for the first annual Crawfordsville Paranormal Convention. Again, both of those events are free, and they're all ages, so bring the whole family. I will be speaking at both the events in October, so come out and talk to me. All the events I will be at, I'll have my recording rig, and I'll have some books and some shirts and some other stuff for you. So make sure to stop by my booth. If you got a story you'd like to share, you can sit down, we can record it. Make sure to follow me around on all the social medias, Facebook, Instagram, X. Look for Brandon Tinfoil Tales on Facebook. You can reach out to me that way too. I think now we're going to bring Travis on. Looking forward to talking with him. He's got some interesting books, so I'm sure he's got some interesting stories to talk about. I hope you guys enjoy the conversation. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. I'd like to take this time to welcome my guest tonight, Travis. Thanks for coming on here talking to me.
Thanks for having me tonight, Brandon. It's good to have a chance to talk to the audience for Tinfoil Tales.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Do you want to let the audience know a little bit about yourself?
So okay. I'm a researcher. I'm an author. I do many things. I write fiction and nonfiction both. My books are published under the name W.T. Watson. So some of you may have ventured across them before. I have kind of a long history in the paranormal. My dad was a UFO experiencer and shared his story with me back when I was 8 years old. I'm 63 now, so I've been around for a while. Um, his basic thing was back in the 50s, he was in the Air Force. He was stationed in Southern California. He was coming home, coming back to base one night near San Bernardino. Had a classic one of those classic 1950s UFO encounters where he saw a cigar-shaped craft that hovered over the road in front of them, kind of forced them to stop. He was with a friend of his. Purple portals and the whole thing. He doesn't recall there having been any missing time or any of that sort of thing, but he, from that time on, anytime anybody said anything negative about UFOs, he was all over it because he's like, I saw one of those things. I know exactly, I know what it's like. They're there. He was very much a supporter of the extraterrestrial hypothesis, but that was kind of my intro into the weird. So, of course, your father tells you a story like that. You start to, at least I did, start to get curious about things. I'd also, I was 8, so I'd read a comic book about hauntings, and between the two things, I started reading everything I could find about UFOs and about hauntings, and I got interested in cryptids shortly after that, and by the time I was in 6th grade, I had read Ivan Sanderson's The Abominable Snowman. Um, so to say that I've been interested in the anomalous and the strange and the Fortean for literally decades would be the truth. So fast forward, I got to be into my 50s. I moved to Canada. My spouse got a job teaching at the University of Waterloo. They're native Canadians, so my wife was coming home and I was coming to a whole new adventure. But during the time period when I first immigrated here, of course, we were in the middle of the pandemic, and I had published a novel with Beyond the Fray Publishing. And they had asked me if I could do a book on the Phantom Black Dog apparition, which was the main character in my novel was associated with the Phantom Black Dogs. I moved to Canada and I had, to wait to get my papers to be able to work. So I had a period of time where I really could do pretty much whatever I wanted. So I spent that time writing books. Uh, so during that time period, I wrote Phantom Black Dogs, or I published Phantom Black Dogs Walkers the Liminal Way, which is about the Phantom Black Dog apparition that most people associate with Great Britain or the UK and Ireland, but is actually seen in Canada. There are black dog stories in the United States and also in South and Central America, where there's a very vibrant history or lore of the Phantom Black Dog. I followed that up with a book called Mysteries in the Mist, which is all about mist, fog, and clouds in the paranormal. It's one of my favorite of my books because it covers a little bit of everything. If you're interested in the paranormal at all, there's a story in Mysteries and the Myths that will interest you. It's everything from cryptids to UFOs to time slips, and other anomalous mist-related occurrences where people would. There's stories in the book about people driving into mists and ending up in places that they didn't recognize, finding out that they had traveled several hundred kilometers. Um, so, there's all kinds of fun weirdness in that one. Um, since I was living in Canada, I'd also decided that I wanted to explore some of the strangeness in my new home. And I published Canadian Monsters and Mysteries, which again is a compendium of a lot of different strange things that are known to happen here. Focuses a bit on the lake monsters that are so prevalent here in Canada. We have several different lakes that purport to have lake monsters in them. But I also talk about UFOs, um, and and other bits of strangeness in Canada. For instance, the giant beavers, which is one of my favorite stories in the book. There are stories in more uninhabited parts of Canada about giant beavers, and there's actually uh, a known fossil record creature that these critters could be. It's
Like from the
I
Ice
think it
Age
was called
time.
yeah, it was called Castorides ohioensis, if I remember correctly. Don't
Hmm.
quote me on that. But these guys were actually beavers that existed, 10,000 years or so ago, that existed that were the size of bears, which is exactly what people, particularly people in the native population here in Canada, uh, are describing. This is just a monstrous, really, really big beaver, right? So that was one of my favorite things because everybody thinks, when you think of Canada, people think of beavers, they think of moose, those kinds of things. And so giant beavers seem to fit right into the whole Canadian vibe. I followed that book up with Sasquatch Canada, which is my straight up research into Class A sightings of Sasquatch, that is, visual sightings of a Sasquatch here in Canada. Um, I focused on, since everybody talks about BC, I focused on the provinces outside of BC, and I found Sasquatch sightings in all of in all of the provinces of Canada. The only one that I didn't find was Nunavut, which is way up north. Um, may have something to do with the landscape there, or it may have something to do with the majority of the people that live in Nunavut are Inuit, and they may just not be willing to share their stories. We don't know. They're not in available databases anyway. But there are tons of Sasquatch sightings here in Canada, and one of the things that I tell people all the time when I do podcasts or I'm talking to people about my books, we have hundreds of thousands of square kilometers of wilderness in Canada. It's the second largest country in the world, has, I believe, the longest sea coast in the world. Um, and there's all kinds of places you could hide a large cryptid animal. Uh, for instance, we actually have a Lazarus species here in Canada. It's called the wood bison, that was pronounced extinct at the beginning of the 1900s, and then was rediscovered in the 1950s by a Park Service employee who was flying over a park in Manitoba and found a whole herd of them. Now, the wood bison is actually the largest land animal in North America, not the tallest, but the largest by weight. So if you can lose that for several decades, who knows what else you can lose in the Canadian wilderness?
Right.
So, I make a point of when I talk about my books of saying that I don't discount the idea that there could actually be a physical creature involved in Sasquatch sightings. I think there's a whole lot more to it, but I don't discount the idea that there could be a physical creature because there's plenty of room up here for there to be something like that. Um, and in, of course, the Pacific Northwest and British Columbia and all of those places too. There's some very convincing sightings here in Canada. You also have some pretty weird sightings here in Canada where you start to get into that area where the creature that's being described obviously is not a physical animal. We have disappearing Sasquatch. We have Sasquatch that mentally communicate with people. We have the Sasquatch with the self-illuminating eyes and all of those sorts of things for people to take into consideration as they're looking at Sasquatch lore.
The woo
And
factor.
finally, I'm sorry.
They call it the woo factor.
Yeah, and I know that there are people in Sasquatch research who are just very much opposed to anything to do with the woo, but unfortunately, there are enough witness accounts out there that include these really strange things that happen. Sasquatch vanishing in front of somebody's eyes, those kinds of things that we have to take those things into consideration. People are seeing something, and whatever Sasquatch is may not always be, a Gigantopithecus or a giant bipedal primate. It may be something else, which brings us to my final book. The book that I have out right now is called Forest Poltergeist, and one of the things that you notice when you start to do research into the Sasquatch phenomena is that there are a lot of what they call Class A sightings. In other words, somebody visually saw a Sasquatch. They saw something walking through the woods or wherever it was that they happened to be. There are also a ton of what are called Class B encounters. And these things fascinated me because what happens in a Class B encounter is that the person doesn't actually see a Sasquatch, but they have incidences of rock throwing, they have incidences of wood knocks. There are vocalizations, there are maybe footprints, there's all of these quote unquote signs of Sasquatch presence in the area, but nobody actually sees this critter. I was talking with another podcaster a while back, and he pointed out that if you took all of these things that people associate with Sasquatch out in the wilderness and you put it in a house, you'd have a poltergeist case. And I said to him, okay, that's an interesting thought. Are you going to write a book about that by any chance? And he said no. He had too many other irons in the fire to try and write a book about that particular thing. And I asked him, so do you mind if I write a book about it? And he was gracious enough to let me borrow his idea, and I took off with it. One of the things that I realized very quickly in doing the research for this book was you have a ton of Class B Sasquatch encounters. I mean, if you look at the BFRL website, for instance, you just find dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of these things. And when you go to research the lore of poltergeists, you have psychical research that goes back to, the 1800s. And there are probably thousands of poltergeist cases that you can get into. So it's a very deep rabbit hole to go into either side, either Sasquatch lore or poltergeist lore. So I had to be very choosy about the poltergeist cases that I talked about, and I had to kind of pick and choose the the Class B encounters that I talked about in this book, so that, I didn't end up writing a 3-volume set. My books are all very digestible length. I intend them to be an introduction to an idea, and then I give people bibliographical references so that if they want to go deeper, they can do that. That's kind of how I approach things. So the basic thrust of the Forest Poltergeist is that we need to, as researchers, stop siloing. If you talk to people in the paranormal field, excuse me, if you talk to people in the paranormal field, you very quickly realize that people tend to get into a particular field of research and stay there. The Sasquatch researchers are researching Sasquatches, and the UFO researchers are researching UFOs, and the ghost hunters are hunting ghosts, and and they don't look at the similarities or the commonalities that you can find throughout all of this paranormal stuff, all of this different stuff. I mean, a lot of people would argue that Sasquatch isn't paranormal. I would argue right back with them, but all of these things that that people are looking at, if they would stop and look at what's going on in some of these other fields, they might find some interesting areas of research to follow. And that's kind of that's the impetus behind the Forest Poltergeist, is the idea that I'm taking what everybody is assuming is a presence of a giant bipedal primate in the wilderness, and saying, look, it doesn't necessarily have to be that. Every single thing that you tell me about, that you are pointing at as a evidence that Sasquatch is out there, I can point to a poltergeist case and say, yeah, but this phenomena is doing that as well. And that was the thing that I wanted to do, was to get people to think outside that box, because it's so much the case that we do. We like our rituals, and we like our protocols and our standard ways of thinking, because it means we don't have to spend too much time burning brain cells on it. But sometimes when you have when you're faced with the unknown, you have to step outside those boxes and look at different disciplines, and that's basically the thrust of the book.
You mentioned some stuff from your other books that piqued my interest. You mentioned lake monsters, and I've said it many times. I wish I could get someone that had an eyewitness account with a lake monster, because I would like to have that interview. It's
Oh
always
yeah.
Those have always been like the Loch Ness monster, Lake and Champ up in Lake Champlain, and like all those other, like, those are all stuff that I was hugely into when I was a kid. I'm a huge Godzilla fan, so
Oh
anything that
yeah.
comes out of the water is,
Oh, me too. Yeah.
so
I
that's
have a model of the big guy that sits on my desk that my my stepson brought me back from the Shinjuku in Tokyo.
that's awesome.
So I just he's one of my mascots on my desk where I work.
I've got
But yeah, I mean, there are there are several lakes in Canada that have have these monster sightings. Probably the most notable being Lake Okanagan, which is the critter they call Ogopogo.
mhm.
And those sightings go back into the 1700s, back in, well, probably before that. The native people in that area knew about whatever it was that lived in the lake, and basically warned the settlers about it. And some of those settlers found out to their detriment that the Indians weren't blowing smoke. That it actually was the case that there was something in that lake. And those sightings have continued up to, as far as I'm aware, up to the present day. So, yeah, I mean, I was fascinated by Loch Ness too when I was a kid. That was another one of my areas. My mother was actually born in Scotland, so when I heard about Loch Ness, it was kind of like, oh, it's like my national cryptid, right? So, yeah, lake monster cases are, on the one hand, you know, there's something peculiar going on because it seems like these cases happen in a sort of a narrow band of latitudes. Um, they happen in these very deep, very cold lakes in places like Canada and Scotland and even Russia. I can't recall of a Russian lake monster right off the top of my head, but I know that there are instances there as well. Now, what is it about these still deep, cold, dark lakes that it seems to attract this phenomena? It seems like it would be very difficult for an actual physical creature to uh, to survive in a limited space like that. I know there have been tons of arguments about, oh, well, there are many trout in Loch Ness and blah, blah, blah. We're talking about what seems to be a fairly sizable critter. And, if you're going to have any kind of breeding population, there has to be more than one. Um, so how is it that these animals are surviving, and how is it that they are avoiding detection? Even though, again, there are instances of anomalous sonar readings in Loch Ness, um, and I, the lake name has slipped my mind. It might be Simcoe here in Canada that has its own little lake monster that there are claims that there was sonar of this critter too. And again, this is not a lake that is really large enough to support a large number of, or even a small number of, fairly hefty lake monsters, whatever those happen to be, whatever that is. I mean, I was all into the plesiosaur theory when I was a kid, but
Right.
I mean, I've discovered since then that there are people who believe that some of these lake monsters are a known species of pinniped, which is a likely scenario as well. Um, I mean, lots of theorizing, but not a lot of answers when it comes to why it is that lake monsters seem to appear in very specific types of lakes. I mean, is there something about you know the uh, the energy of the land or the energy of the water that's attracting whatever it is that's manifesting these phenomena? It's super mysterious and kind of creepy. And Loch Ness is one of those places that's on my bucket list of places to go when I retire.
I would love to go there.
I'd really love to see it, up close and, you know,
You
see if I
kind
can
of,
do a conjuration on the lake shores and have the monster appear or something.
yeah, you kind of were going down the path that I was just kind of thinking about. Is we mentioned the woo factor for Sasquatch encounters and stuff, but maybe something like that's what these lake monsters manifest from too.
Well, yeah, I mean, there is, and I'm going to back up into another cryptid and one that I haven't spent a lot of time covering, but because the late great Linda Godfrey did such a terrific job of it. But when Linda Godfrey was doing her research into the man wolf or dog man phenomena, um, she had the opportunity to talk to some native folks and actually discuss with a Ho-Chunk elder uh, what he thought. In this case, she was asking him about Sasquatch, and he told her straight up, "Oh, well, these are beings that live in the other world, and they can come into our world. They assume a physical form when they're here, and then when they're ready to go back, they go back." Which, I mean, makes a lot of sense to me. It would explain a lot of things because, yeah, I mean, you have Sasquatch encounters in places where a large bipedal primate shouldn't exist. I mean, it's one thing to talk about Sasquatch in the wilds of Canada, and the possibility that that might be an actual thing, an actual real animal, physical animal. It's another thing though when you start having people reporting Sasquatches on, in the deserts of Arizona. Um, where is a creature like that going to hide in Arizona?
Yeah.
Now, northern Arizona, yes. You have ponderosa pine forests and stuff up there. But some of the areas that are reporting Sasquatch sightings are, very open and very little cover. I mean, there might be some caves or whatever, but Sasquatch would have to live a pretty lonely existence, I think, and only come out at night if it were going to try to live in a place like that. Um, and we have again these Class B encounters where people are encountering rock throwing and wood knocking and rock clacking and uh, mumbling voices and bipedal footsteps and all this kind of thing, which again, you know, can all be attributed, are being attributed to Sasquatch, but can just as easily be a part of the poltergeist phenomena, whatever that turns out to be. And, it, again, you get that kind of woo factor. You get there's something more going on here. Maybe there's something interdimensional going on here. I like to just call it the other world. Um, I'm a very animistic thinker. And so I believe that there are, that we live in a vast ecosystem that is composed of not just physical corporeal forms, but also spiritual forms. And some of those spiritual forms may be capable of making themselves manifest in our plane for certain periods of time. I mean, and you have I mean, if you remember the psychical research on physical mediums and some of the strange things that happened in association with those guys, what was his name? Home, flying out one window and flying into another window. Um, there's all kinds of stuff out there, all kinds of weird things out there that argue that there is a woo dimension, however you want to call that. And, I mean, I know that a lot of people are like, oh, well, if we start to believe that, then, um, UFOs aren't nuts and bolts craft, and Sasquatch aren't these physical bipedal primates and that sort of thing. And all of our belief systems are going to kind of get blown up. And honestly, I think maybe some of those belief systems need to get blown up, um, because they're limiting. They're very limiting. Um, I am what I call a both and thinker. Instead of an either or thinker, it's either this thing or that thing. Um, I like to think that there are a whole bunch of different uh, things that could account for some of the strangeness that we see in our world. when I talk about what a poltergeist is, or what the Forest Poltergeist is, and in my my most recent book, I talk about things like the fact that some of these things may be human manifestations of human powers. The poltergeist is associated with something called RSPK, or random spontaneous psychokinesis. Yeah, RSPK, which was a theory of William Rolls and some other parapsychologists, that most poltergeist cases have a focus. Uh, the phenomena tends to occur around one particular person in the house more than anybody else, and that their theory is that oftentimes these are children or adolescents or people who are in some other way repressed. And so essentially poltergeists are a psychic temper tantrum. These kids or people apparently have some kind of a psychokinetic gift. And so when they are put into situations where they can't express themselves outwardly, then that impulse translates into psychokinetic activity. And and I don't discount that idea. I mean, we know that PK, micro PK at least, has been pretty well proven in double blind laboratory studies where they're using random number generation and that kind of thing. The case for macro PK is more anecdotal. Stories of people who've been able to do these things, but it's just one of many human powers that could be responsible for some of the weird stuff that happens around us. Another thing is the idea of, some people like to call them tulpas. I think that's kind of appropriative of Tibetan culture, so I call them thought forms. It's this idea that given a very clear visual image, given a lot of desire, and given the idea to sort of novelize an image, we can actually create things that have a more or less solid form from just our minds, basically. Um, I think it might have been John Keel, but don't quote me on that, who tells the story of uh, the home of the fellow who used to write The Shadow, the radio uh, character. His home being haunted by a figure that looked like the Shadow. So you had a guy who spent a period of time with a very clear image in his mind, who was bringing this character to life, and who had a strong, force or desire to bring this character to life. And apparently, it's been so. Um, there are stories in the magical communities about groups of practitioners getting together and creating thought forms that, for instance, protect certain areas. I read of one group of witches that did a working to try and develop a guardian for an island where baby seals were being killed. And subsequently, this figure that they had created, because they'd made a painting of it, and they spent a lot of time and energy creating this thought form and putting it out there. And apparently, this thing was seen on this island. So, there's another thing. You have, when we're talking about Sasquatch, for instance, we have groups of people out there who have a strong desire to see a Sasquatch. We have people who have a very clear visual image of what a Sasquatch looks like, and then we have these same people who have gone to great lengths to develop a story for the Sasquatch. This is how they behave, this is how they hunt, this is what they do, this is their migration. I mean, you talk to some of these folks, they have very very intense stories about how Sasquatch is. Is it not possible that some of these groups, are putting so much energy into this that they're actually creating their own Sasquatch? Could be, could be. So you see, we have all of these different things that could be going on if we take a more Fortean approach to the paranormal. When you talk about the Forest Poltergeist, you can also be talking about the fair folk. The Fae have a strong reputation for creating poltergeisty type activity, especially when you've invaded their territory and they don't approve of whatever it is that you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
There are stories of people walking into fairy circles and trying to join the dance and literally being knocked out. Um, and there are stories of people building their homes on what was known as a fairy path, supposedly a path that the fair folk used for traveling from one place to the other during different seasons. If you built your home on one of those paths, it was almost certain to cause you trouble. In one case that I read about, there were deaths in the family as a result. In another case, there was an outbreak of what looked like poltergeist activity until they actually shaped their house so that it wasn't encroaching on this path. I mean, my point is in all this is that any of these phenomena that we look at, whether it's lake monsters, whether it's Sasquatch, whether we're talking about UFOs or ghosts or whatever, there are a lot of different things that could be happening, ranging from human caused things to spirit caused things and including physical phenomena as well. I mean, in the Sasquatch instance, as I said, I don't have a problem believing that there's a large bipedal primate out there somewhere. But if somebody brings one in tomorrow, that doesn't solve the mystery. That solves part of the mystery. But you still can't explain stories like the one in Stan Gordon's book where the woman is sitting in her living room and she's watching TV. She hears a noise on her porch. She's had a problem with feral dogs in the neighborhood, so she scoops up her shotgun, goes out on the porch and confronts a 7 foot tall Sasquatch on her porch. Well, apparently the Sasquatch is as surprised as she is to see the thing. It throws its hands up. She thinks she's being attacked. She shoots the thing and it disappears in a flash of light. Now, that's obviously not a physical creature. you know, so even if all of these researchers manage to produce a physical specimen someday, that's only going to answer part of the story. Yeah, I think that you're still going to see, a lot of these forest poltergeist type Class B encounters happening out in the woods because I don't think that it's just about Sasquatch. Um, there's a lot more going on.
I think there's a lot of different factors that like you've just touched on, but I feel like a lot of it is all still connected. When you go into your cryptids and you go into your paranormal and your UFOs, I feel like somehow one way or the other, a lot of it is all interconnected one way. I don't know how to explain it, like of how it's possible, but I feel like that's somehow they've all got some sort of connection to each other. I can't,
Yeah, I
I
mean,
can't prove it. It's just my opinion, but
no, well, you can't really prove anything in this field, right? I
no.
mean, you know, I know that the Sasquatch researchers, for one, are hoping that they're gonna lay a body on a slab one of these days, or have some other kind of irrefutable evidence that there's a physical creature, and all the UFO hunters are looking for the crashed flying saucers and stuff. But excuse me, when you start to look at these things, the other thing that pops into my brain when you start talking about the connection between the things is this whole idea of the trickster. Because it seems like um, a lot of times in these cases, something is playing with us. Um, you have these scenarios. Well, a good example of this in UFO lore, and I'm kind of getting off the topic of the Forest Poltergeist, but that's fine. In UFO lore, if you look at the history of it, it seems like the craft that are being seen are just a little bit beyond the capabilities of the people that are seeing them. When you talk about the late 1800s, you had airships. And you had these guys that were flying. You had what appeared to be people flying around in uh, what looked like a dirigible, except there wasn't any such thing at that point in time. And they were doing things like landing on people's farms and asking for water and doing all this sort of bizarre stuff, right? Um, and and so the age of aviation came about and the Wright brothers and all that stuff. You move forward, you get into the 1930s, and before World War II, you had the ghost rockets in the Nordic countries, where people were reporting seeing these rockets that were flying around. Now, during World War II, of course, we started to get V2 rockets, and you got the age of jet propulsion and all that sort of stuff going on. During World War II itself, the UFOs morphed again and turned into Foo Fighters. These globes of light that were these anomalous lights that were being seen by both Allied and Axis pilots. And the Allied pilots all thought it was a German secret weapon, and the Axis pilots all thought it was, an Allied secret weapon. Nobody actually knew what the heck it was. And then you drop into the 50s, and you have now we have jet fighters and we have all this stuff, all this more advanced technology, and suddenly UFOs become flying saucers. And it keeps going like that. I mean, we develop more advanced aerial technology and fighter jets and those kinds of things, and the UFOs change shape and become giant triangles that fly over people's houses, or now we've got these tic tac things flying around out in the Pacific Ocean. It's always seems like it's just a little bit ahead of what we're capable of doing. It's like it's playing with us. So you know, I always, I don't always, but I sometimes feel like there's an intelligence um, that's throwing this stuff at us. Um, and I've raised the possibility in other podcasts that we have a situation now, particularly here in the West, where we don't really have any rites of passage. Back in the tribal times, people would go off and they'd go through ordeals and whatever, and discover their place in the society, in the tribal society. We don't have that anymore. We don't have a rite of passage from childhood into adulthood, unless you consider things like high school graduation or college graduation or something along that line. But it doesn't have the deep spiritual significance that it had back then. And most importantly, one of the things that happened during these rites of passage in tribal cultures was that certain individuals were recognized as having a strong connection to the spirit world. Um, some people call them shaman. You know, there are a number of names for them, but call them spirit workers. These spirit workers had this strong connection to the spirit world, and they were recognized for this. They trained under other people who had this connection, and they became the healers and the seers and so forth of the tribe. We don't have that anymore. We don't have any way of recognizing these people. If someone has these talents, these spirit worker type talents, um, it only gets recognized by accident sometime, or if it's just so apparent that they can't avoid it. I have to wonder, though, if some of these anomalous experiences that people are having, whether it's UFO sightings, whether it's Sasquatch encounters, lake monster encounters for that matter, one of the things that we see in experiencer reports is that a certain number of people are like, oh, well, I saw this interesting thing, and they go on and they live their lives. A certain number of people are like are of the opinion that, oh, I saw this interesting thing, and they avoid whatever it was that got them into this interesting thing. Sasquatch witnesses may start to avoid the wilderness after seeing one of these critters. But a certain number of people have the experience of having their paradigm completely shifted when they encounter the anomalous. They suddenly become aware that reality isn't exactly what they thought it was. And this puts them on a path that leads them into, we see this a lot with near-death experiences too, where people come back from these experiences and it changes their lives. It changes their paradigm completely because they understand in a very real way that this other world is real. So I wonder if some of these anomalous experiences and some of the experiencers that we see out there are not having these anomalous experiences are forming initiatic experiences, moving people into contact with the other side or the other world or whatever you want to call it, the 0 point field or whatever. So it's and that is a connection that I think is worth pursuing too. But yeah, I do sometimes have a really strong feeling that there's an intelligence behind these things, and sometimes it's just fooling with us.
The reason I do this podcast and the reason we're talking tonight is because in 2007, I had a very strange experience with an upright walking canine in the middle of the road,
No,
15 feet from me.
wow,
So when you mentioned that earlier and you just went, when you just talk, stuff you were just mentioning, like I didn't believe in any of this stuff back in 2007. I was a skeptic, and I still try and say I'm a skeptic, but I'm very open-minded because when you see something completely illogical that shouldn't make any like it's not possible, but you're seeing it plain as day, you cannot it literally changes how you view the world. So I agree to that.
it shakes your worldview up.
It does.
It shakes your worldview up in a big way. Now, as I said, I have always been open to the idea that, you know, that these anomalous things are real. So I don't come at it from a so much. I guess my brain is just wired that way. Most of my experiential stuff has been more visionary. Um, so I don't really, talk too much about it because, most people, you don't want to tell people that you're hearing voices sometimes
Yeah.
or seeing things that aren't there.
Hmm.
It can get you into serious trouble depending on who you're talking with.
Right.
Um, uh, but I mean, I lived in Western New York for a time before I moved to Canada. Um, and lived in a little house not too far from the shore of Lake Erie, um, and right across the street from a 700-acre state park. And I had a couple of kind of bizarre experiences. One of the things that happened to me on a regular basis there. I'm not afraid of the dark. Um, I've spent nights out on my own, uh, minimalist camping in, you know, like the Superstition Mountains in Arizona, which is one of the creepier places on the planet at night. I'm not afraid of the dark. Uh, but while I was living in this house, every fall and every spring for about 1 week, I could not bear to have the curtains open at night. Now, any other time, I was fine. You have curtains open wherever you want, whatever, throw the windows open, whatever. During that 1 week, for whatever reason, I had to have the windows shut and the curtains drawn after sunset. And I have absolutely no idea why that would be. There was the strong feeling in my mind that there was something out there and I didn't want to see it. And I have no idea what that was about. The other weird thing that happened to me when I lived there, um, I commuted to work every morning. So I rode the bus. So I would get up early and I would walk down my street, which is quarter of a mile down to the intersection there. And there was a bus that ran up that street and picked me up and basically delivered me right to the front door of my office, which is very nice. Took me an hour or so to get to work, but it was nice because I could sit and read or whatever. The interesting thing about this though was I was walking down that road one morning, and I heard something there's very dense forest, like right across the street. As I said, there was a state park there. There's something in the forest that huffed, and it was so loud that the thing that jumped into my mind, and this is bizarre. The thing that jumped into my mind was, you watch movies, you see dragons, right? The thing that jumped into my mind was a dragon huffing, making this loud sound. Again, I have no idea what that was. There's not an animal in that area. Yeah, I mean, we had plenty of deer, we had fox, we had coyotes, we had raccoons and possums and all of those sorts of things. Nothing that was large enough to make a sound like that. I have no idea what that sound was, and I never heard it again. So I didn't have a chance to track it down. One of the things that I tell people is, if you hear anomalous sounds out in the wilderness, you need to keep going back because a lot of times you can figure out what it is. I had this happen with a crow call when I moved to Canada. I was out walking my dogs, and I heard this sound that was just bizarre. This kind of grating sound, and not a sound that I was familiar with. But I kept hearing it as I'd go out to walk the dogs, and eventually I figured out that our local crows, our local murder of crows, had a very distinct call that was unlike, and I've lived around crows and ravens almost all of my life. It was unlike anything I'd heard with any crow or raven that I'd met in the States. But there it was, and it was sitting up on top of a building, making this very bizarre sound. Um, so I mean, a lot. I guess I could be classified as a believer in the paranormal, but I also try to keep a mind as to what kinds of physical things could be out there making those sounds. I mean,
Mhm.
if you've ever heard a northern hawk owl making its sound, you'd think there was a raptor coming to get you, right out of Jurassic Park. Um, very spooky noise, and it's moving around out in the trees and stuff. And you're like, what in the world is that? Um, I've spent some time outdoors, and I always kind of giggle when I watch some of these shows, and it's, oh, that must be a Sasquatch. It's like, and it's very clearly a coyote howling in the distance. But yeah, you have to
Yep.
entertain people, I
I was
guess.
say they got to make it entertaining. I feel like majority of the shows are embellished enough just to keep people's interest. But
Yeah, unfortunately so. I mean, but you have to understand that these shows are entertainment, and uh, while we would wish that they were a little more educational about some things, um, you know, they are entertaining, and they do attract a certain number of people into investigating more deeply whatever it is that they're watching about, whether it's ghost hunting or Sasquatch or whatever. So yeah, I mean, some good comes of it, I'm sure.
I think it helps people into this side, like more open to the possibility of the strangeness. I don't know if they fully believe, but I think it makes them a little bit more acceptive towards it, I guess.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that uh, is advantageous about these shows is that it cracks the ridicule factor a little bit. Um, it used to be, when I was a kid, uh, even as a young adult and so forth, if you said that you'd seen a Sasquatch or UFO, or you'd had a ghost encounter or whatever, ever, people looked at you like, you needed to go check yourself into the nearest psych ward.
Hmm.
And while that is the case with some people still, um, it is, it's true that I think these shows have made more people aware that people are having these experiences. And while they may not personally believe in it, or you know uh, have any interest in it, um, it makes people a little bit more accepting of the experience. It's like, because you see, it's like the argument that a lot of people make. Thousands of people at this point have seen Sasquatch, right? Literally laid eyes on this creature. They got to be seeing something. Yeah. And while, the scientists might want you to believe that all of these are misidentified black bears or delusions, um, enough of the witnesses are credible, hunters, law enforcement people, special forces, soldiers, and so forth. Enough of these people, particularly the hunters, they know what the hell a bear looks like. And they're the idea that they're misidentifying a bear is frankly ludicrous.
I was gonna
So
say the whole bear thing pisses me off because
the whole bear thing, it's just, I find it laughable. It's like, I'm sorry, I know what a bear looks like. I'm not going to mistake a bear, even a bear standing on its hind legs, for a massive 8 foot tall bipedal primate. Sorry, that's not going to happen. I know what a
bear,
bear looks like.
bears
In the
don't walk
same manner,
fluently like that either on
and
two legs.
yeah, and bears don't have the same fluidity that's described in Sasquatch encounters, and they have snouts, and their shoulders aren't right for the Sasquatch description. I mean, there's just a whole host of things. So, that's just one of those BS scientific materialist things that get thrown out there periodically to muddy the water. Um, and totally forgot where I was going with this, but um, yeah, it's a situation where with these TV shows that I think people are becoming a little more accepting of the experience. I mean, if you look at uh, the difference in attitudes toward UFOs and UFO experiencers in the 60s and 70s versus UFOs and UFO experiencers now. I mean, there was a time when, if the news was reporting on UFO, you almost inevitably got the theme from the X-Files playing in the background, and it was thoroughly tongue-in-cheek, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, we've got national news playing the Tic Tac videos and taking it completely seriously, and basically saying, "Okay, we don't know what this is, but there it is." Our Navy jets are chasing these things around, and we don't know what they are. Big difference in attitude. And so I think some of uh, that wall of materialism, that these things can't possibly exist because we say they can't exist, is starting to break down.
The stigma isn't as strong as it used to be
Yeah.
when people come forward with stuff too. That's kind of like why I do the show. I've said it before, is I never felt like I could talk about the thing that I saw. So I wanted to make a
Oh yeah.
show and talk to people that saw the same type of things, because I never felt like I could talk about it. So I wanted to give a place for people that could, like, where they could come on and talk about it. Because in my mind,
Sure.
if I would have brought it up, everyone would laugh at you, think you're crazy, because that's typical for what
Yeah.
happens when you see strange things.
Yeah, there's a very strong ridicule factor. And it's still, I mean, I'm convinced that many, many, many more people have seen things they couldn't explain than have reported them. Because for every person who comes forward and makes a report, I'll bet you, I mean, and this is completely unscientific, can't prove this, but I'll bet you there's 3 or 4 more that never reported their experience. Yeah, because what will people think? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and particularly when you have people who are in professional fields and so forth, they're afraid they're going to lose their jobs if this stuff gets out. Um, if it comes out that they saw a Sasquatch, or they had a UFO experience or whatever, and in some cases that could still happen. I don't think it's quite as prevalent as it used to be, but I mean, I can see certain workplaces where that kind of thing just wouldn't be tolerated.
No.
So in your uh, man-wolf encounter, did you feel threatened by this creature, or was it just a thing that was there?
And I can tell you the whole thing when we're off air. That way,
Okay.
I don't like taking up my episodes with like interviews for someone else with my own encounters. So I can tell you about it when we're done with the
Uh,
episode.
my curiosity is, it seems that most people who encounter these creatures seem to view them as aggressive, but I've talked to one experiencer who um, has a very different attitude toward it. I don't know.
I didn't,
We can talk about that off here.
yeah, I didn't, for the listeners for right now, like, I didn't take it as aggressive because I was so close to it, standing face to face with it, that it literally could have got me if it wanted to, because I'm 15
Hmm.
feet from it. It just crouched
Yeah.
down and went off on its way, like it wanted to get away from me.
Hmm.
So I didn't, and everyone's like, "Oh, were you afraid?" I was like, "No." They're like, "Well, that's why I left you alone, 'cause you weren't afraid of it." I was like, I was just confused. So I was just trying to figure out what the hell this thing is.
What was that? Why
Yeah.
am I seeing it?
Yeah.
I'll
It's,
bet.
I've told it on other podcasts and stuff before, and everyone always tells me like it's the most bizarre story they've actually heard from someone when it comes to like just the sequence of things and how it went all about. Because I wasn't the only one that saw it. So, but yeah, we'll talk about that here in a few minutes, because we've been talking for
Okay.
about an hour. So I want to go back
Yep.
and talk about your books real quick before we wrap this up.
Okay.
So you want to let the audience know where they can find your books at and everything else?
Sure. I'm all of my paranormal stuff is published under Beyond the Fray Publishing. Um, it's a little outfit out of Las Vegas, and my books are all available on Amazon. they're available. You can get them as either paperbacks or the Kindle version. And if you happen to be a Kindle Unlimited subscriber, you can read them for free. So that's hard to beat. As far as contact with me goes, my two major social media outlets are Facebook and Instagram. I've kind of given up on Twitter.
Yeah.
I just can't keep up. Everybody thinks, oh, well, authors make lots of money. It's like, not really. I work a day job like everybody else. And, I do this, part-time in my spare time. So, I do a Facebook where you can find me, W.T. Watson author page. On Instagram, I have an old handle that I use. It's Curunir, CURUNIR 60. So I'm always glad to hear from people. I sometimes get sighting reports from people online, but mostly I think people like to follow and see what I'm up to. So
Yeah.
and I'm happy to hear from folks that have read my books and such.
You can shoot me all your links in an email. I will include all of that in the show notes for anyone listening. They just can go there and click on it and take it to where they need to go.
Great, will do.
Well, Travis,
I'll send you my author bio too.
Okay, yeah, I'd include that too. But I want to say again, I do appreciate you coming on here and talking with me tonight. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, absolutely. It's been great. Thanks for having me.
Not a problem. Thank you for coming on here. And for everyone out there listening, make sure to check out Travis's books and make sure to hit him up on social medias. But on that note, we're going to roll out here. So thanks for listening. Good night. And that's the show, everyone. I really hope you guys enjoyed the conversations. If you would like to be a guest on Tinfoil Tales, remember to send an email to tinfoiltalespodcast@gmail.com or go to the contact section of tinfoiltales.com. Just get your message to me. We'll get something scheduled for a future episode. And just remember, the truth lies in the stories we share, the connections we make. Stay curious, stay open-minded. Thank you all for joining us on this journey. And until next time, keep questioning, keep seeking, and keep exploring the unknown. Good night, everyone.
Tinfoil Tales in the headphones. Yeah, it's time to rock. Got a story about a cryptic creature. Let's take a walk. Bigfoot, dogman, they're out there in the dark. But the truth is out there like an alien spark. UFO sightings got the whole world shook. Conspiracies unfold like a story in a book. Media control, trying to keep us blind. Oh, before gonna use my own mind. In mystery, they don't want us to know. The secrets they hide, the truth they won't show. Domain of society, they keep us in chains. But I'm standing tall, it's time to break the reins. Control, trying to keep us blind, but I won't be fooled, gonna use my own mind. In history